for a region. And I
Good
suspect
evening,
it's
Earth.
just
This
because
is
it
Adam
is
Sturch
something
broadcasting from the Mushroom
so
Ranch in Taos,
essential
New
to our
Mexico,
nature that we
working
find
on
it
oil
hard
painting
to believe
electric
that
eel.
there's anything surprising about it.
Alright, tonight we're just going to continue with the coloration of solid shapes. I've got some bright light green mixed up out of emerald phthalo,
No.
a bit of white, and a bit of light green.
It's
Here we
by
go.
curiosity. I'm here. I'd like to have your specific point of view, maybe with Fitch and Hauser too, about the recent research on molecular biology on the FOXP2 genes, and I'd like to have your point of view about the implication about your linguistic generative theory, the implication of the FOXP2 genes. No?
What's the implication of the FOXP2 gene?
Yes.
FOXP2?
Yeah.
You don't care, or?
Yeah, it's an interesting. It's not very clear that it has all that much to do with language. The FOXP2 is found in all kinds of fine motor coordination and things like that. It is related to certain language disorders and so on. So maybe it means something, maybe not.
But you don't have any point of view yet, so.
I don't have anything to say about it, but there's literature on it, and I think it leaves the status of the question. But maybe somebody here knows more than I do and can say something. But what I've read about it seems to suggest that the FOXP2 gene. First of all, it's found in organisms all over the place, and it's involved in lots of different kinds of activities, like fine motor coordination. And the idea that you're going to find a gene for language is very strange. That's just not the way genetics works. I mean, genes do all kind of different things depending on which kind of configurations they're in, what master genes control them, and so on. I mean, a gene's just producing a protein, and it can be doing it in all kind of. It can be doing it in different ways in the same organism at different stages of development.
Yes, hello.
You cannot escape the question of the genetics of a universal grammar of language. Not talking about genes, but if you're right, I mean, you have to find the mechanisms, the genetic mechanism that allow language.
To find a mechanism, surely, but we also want to find a mechanism for insect navigation. Yeah, okay, so, and the question is where to look. For insect navigation, nobody knows where to look.
For example, the way you define language, there is no language in monkeys, there is language in the human species, right? So we have to find what the difference is. Why?
Well, that's a little bit like saying that there's human navigation and bee navigation, and we have to find out what the difference is. It's not a sensible question. There's no reason to think there's any relation between them. I mean, bees do dead reckoning. We don't. Okay, so that's a difference. To find the neural basis for that it's beyond today's science. And you can only investigate it if you learn something about each of the cases. So if you learn about each of the cases, so if you want to compare, say, how I get home at night with how a bee gets back to the nest, you're going to first have to learn something about how I get home at night, and separately how a bee gets back to the hive, and then you can see if there's anything related. There's no particular reason to expect much. And in the case of what we call animal language, that's just a metaphor. It's like bee navigation.
I'm not talking about animal language, but you're saying that the universal grammar, UG, is some of innate or genetics, could be specific to the human. I believe that very strongly, but you still have to explain it, because the question of a label FOXP2 could be not the type of question we like, but in any way, if it is innate, we have to understand this phenomenon at the genetic level at some point.
some point,
At some point.
at some point, we hope to study it, to be able to say something about it at the genetic level, at the neurophysiological level, and so on. And we'd like to say something about the evolution too.
It has appeared at some point also. So I think it has also appeared during evolution at some point. Something like appeared, emerged, appeared.
Yeah.
Well, it's something
Language
it
has
was
It
not.
appeared
It was
at a certain point.
something like 120,000 years ago. Something has happened
Yeah,
that allow us to
I understand.
have a language.
That's perfectly
So this you
true.
cannot escape.
And these are extremely hard problems. They're way beyond the problems that science can reach, even for much simpler organisms. See, I think that's another example of the irrationality that surrounds the study of language. People expect to find answers for language that you can't find for insects. It just doesn't make sense to have those expectations. The problems that, say, Gallistel is talking about, can we find the basic neurophysiology of the most elementary computations that insects carry out? Well, so far, there's no progress in that. He argues neurophysiologists are just looking in the wrong place. There'll never be progress. They have to start looking somewhere else. But whether that's right or not, the fact is that essentially nothing is known about it. The study of the neurophysiology of human language is incomparably more complex. So sure, we're going to have to wait a long time before we can find out about that. And apart from the fact of being intrinsically more complex, we also can't carry out intrusive experimentation. So there are things you can do with insects to get answers that you just can't do with humans because you're not allowed to. We know a lot about human vision, but the reason is because we allow ourselves, rightly or wrongly, to torture cats and monkeys, and we figure they have about the same visual system we do. And so therefore we know something about human vision. But in the case of language, there's no other animal to torture. And nobody has any of these properties. So there's essentially no comparative evidence, and there's no invasive techniques that are permissible. And the problem itself, even if we had all of this, would be far more complex than questions that nobody knows how to answer because they're just too hard. Science works at the limits of understanding. It doesn't go way beyond the limits of understanding. It tries to explore the limits of understanding and push them a little farther. And you can think of all kinds of questions that are way beyond the limits of understanding in every field, but you can't investigate them. And questions like these are among them. So yes, it's a goal, something to search for and try to find something about, but it's not very significant if you can't get any answers, since you can't get answers even to far simpler questions, like, say, the neurophysiology of bee navigation or bee communication.
No? And here? Okay. First of all, could you elaborate on what you call design? What exactly is design? Design? Design, yes.
Yeah.
What is it you call design? And the second question is, you often talk about democratic societies, and for you, do we live in a democratic society or not?
I didn't get the last part.
Do we live in a democracy or do we not live in a democracy?
Are we in a democratic society?
Yeah.
It's not really a yes or no question. I mean, democracy has many dimensions. In some respects, we have a more or less democratic society. In other respects, not at all. We have formal elections. Okay, that's property of the democratic society. On the other hand, the capacity to enter into those elections is either as a candidate or someone who supports a candidate is that capacity is distributed very unequally through the society. I mean, some can do it, others can't. Sometimes it's say in an American election, You can only participate in an election if you have a core of campaign funding, which is based where capital is, namely the corporate sector, which is willing to pour money into your campaign. Electoral campaigns you can virtually predict the outcome of the campaign simply by looking at campaign spending. And that means people who can't amass corporate contributions are just can't enter the process. And so if you like, you can say that candidates are vetted by the corporate system. And those who pass their filter can enter into it. Kind of the way in Iran, clerics, the candidates are vetted by the clerical hierarchy, and those who they don't accept can't participate. Right? With us, it's the corporate system that carries out the vetting. We have the right of free expression up to a point. That's an aspect of democracy. It's lacking elsewhere. In countries like the United States, and Europe is not far behind, it's going in the same direction. Electoral campaigns are just extravaganzas, like circuses. The campaign managers purposely keep away from issues. In fact, they say so. They keep to what they call qualities. You want to make sure, because you don't want issues to arise in elections. One of the reasons is that campaign managers read polls, of course, and they know that on issues, the public generally opposes both parties by large majorities. So you want to keep away from issues. And if you look at the study, there's a lot of this is one of the main topics in political science, so there's plenty of data about it. But it turns out that voters have almost no idea where the candidates stand on issues. So, for example, that's not because they're stupid, it's because it's hard to find out. The campaigns are designed so that you don't know. What you're supposed to know in a campaign is that, George Bush is the kind of guy you'd like to have a drink with. Nice guy, he's an ordinary guy who wants to go back to the ranch and, cut brush and run a marathon in 100 degrees heat and have a beer with and so on. But you don't want to know where he stands on issues, if he even knows where he stands on issues, which often they don't, because, it's a kind of democracy, but a very limited kind. In fact, there are countries where there is really functioning democracy. We don't talk about them very much. But take, say, the Western Hemisphere. In 2004 and 2005, there were elections in the richest country in the hemisphere, the United States, and the poorest country in South America, namely Bolivia. And they were radically different. In the United States, the two candidates were Kerry and Bush. They both come from great wealth. They both went to the same elite university, Yale University, where they both joined the same secret society, Skull and Bone Society, which is there to train promising young men and turn them into future political elite. They ran on pretty much the same programs, and the population didn't know what their programs were for the most part. They were able to run because they were supported pretty much by the same concentrations of capital. And the election was kind of like throwing a coin. It comes out more or less randomly. Well, that's the election in the richest country in the hemisphere, the leader of the free world. They go to Bolivia, the poorest country in South America. Well, Bolivia really had a remarkable election. The indigenous population, which is the most repressed population in the hemisphere, it happens to be the majority in Bolivia, they had been involved in very significant popular campaigns for some years. So in the year 2000, for example, they had organized to drive major multinationals out of Libya, including a French one, because they were trying to privatize water. The privatization of water, according to economists and the World Bank, is highly efficient. it has a slight deficiency. Most people can't afford the water, but, well, nothing's perfect, you know. But so they mobilized and they drove the corporations out of the country. And there were a lot of other things going on. They finally got to 2005, there was an election. They got well enough organized so that they were able to enter the political arena and elect someone from their own ranks on issues that they all knew about, important issues, like control over resources and cultural rights in a very complex mixture of cultures, question of justice and so on, and they were committed to it. But furthermore, the election was just one day in a continuous popular struggle, and not like the United States, where it's a day where you go to the poll, push a button, and forget about it. Okay. Well, which country was democratic? I mean, according to everything that's written, the United States is the world leader of democracy, and nobody talks about Bolivia as the world leader of democracy. But on those two occasions, it was quite the opposite. And I think there are many such examples. It's just too multidimensional a question to have a simple answer. Design. Yeah, I kind of feel, I probably shouldn't use the word because it misleads people. Design doesn't mean that there's a designer, of course. It just means whatever the structure of the system is. So, you know, you could talk about the design of the helium molecule, let's say. That's the same way in which you talk about design of language. How is it constructed? What's its nature? There ought to be some better word for that that doesn't lead to misleading connotations.
Oui, je voudrais I'm sorry, I just wanted to ask you, since the other person talked about democracy, me too, I would like to refer to the last part of your speech about democracy and the fact that it's important that the population know about everything. But my question is about state reason and pragmatism. State reason and pragmatism. And that's what we say, raison d'etat in French. And the other question is about lobbying and its effect, negative effects, I can say, in United States of America's government. Thank you. Lobbying, the effect of lobbying in United States, and pragmatism. The link between pragmatism and state reason, raison d'etat.
Well, there are major lobbies in the United States, and they have a big effect on legislation and so on. By far, the biggest ones are the business lobbies. I mean, they just overwhelm everything else. So the Chamber of Commerce, the Business Roundtable, the American Petroleum Institute, the insurance companies, I mean, they have huge lobbies. They spend huge amounts of money, and they pretty much shape legislation and by the congressmen. Those aren't the lobbies that people talk about, but they're the ones that really make a huge difference. There are lots of other lobbies. So there are ethnic lobbies, for example, and sometimes they have an effect. So take, say, the Armenian lobby. It's a small lobby, but it has effects, in fact, sometimes big effects. So just recently, in fact, the Armenian lobby almost caused quite severe problems for the U.S. government in its relations with Turkey by passing a resolution characterizing the Armenian genocide as genocide. Well, Washington didn't do that because that's going to harm relations with one of its major allies. And they managed to deflect it at the last minute. But it's a lobby that's quite small, but had an effect. The biggest ethnic lobby, and the one that gets all the attention, is the Israel lobby, which is real, and it has some effects. But if you look over the record, the idea that the Israel lobby somehow determines U.S. government policy is, my friend Gilbert Ashkar, Middle East specialist, described it as phantasmagoric. that idea. I mean, the relations of power are such that the Israel lobby could not possibly control American policy. In fact, if the business world didn't like U.S. support for Israel, they'd put the Israel lobby out of business in 2 minutes. But they happen to support what Israel's doing, so okay, therefore the lobby can have an effect. And there are plenty of, if you want to study this topic, there's a lot of literature on this topic, but it's not thought through very carefully. There's no use looking at cases where the lobby and Washington have essentially the same interests. It doesn't tell you anything. There's no point looking at cases where Washington just doesn't care and the lobby has an interest. Okay, that doesn't tell you anything. You have to look at the cases where they have opposing interests and then see which prevails. And there are plenty of such cases. And invariably, the lobby disappears. They know they cannot confront government power. And that's true on all sorts of things. And so just to take one example, Israel happens to have its economy is kind of a high-tech economy based quite significantly on military industry, and they need a market. And there's a huge market out there called China. So they'd love to sell high-tech military equipment to China, but Washington doesn't want them to do it. And every time they try to do it, they get smashed down. In the Bush administration, which is supposed to be very pro-Israel, the last Bush administration, in 2005, Israel wanted to sell upgraded anti-aircraft missiles of some kind to China. The Bush administration said, you can't do it. They insisted that we're a sovereign country, we're going to do whatever we want, nobody can push us around. At which point, Washington simply humiliated them. It told them, you're not going to do it. Furthermore, you have to apologize to us formally. And furthermore, we're not going to allow any of your representatives to come to Washington until you do it. Okay, they did it. What did the lobby do? They were hiding in the corridors. They don't want to confront U.S. power. They know more about the power system than that. And that happens on many things. It's happening right now. It's pretty clear. The Israel lobby has repeatedly tried to set up a confrontation between the United States and Iran. So, in fact, during the last presidential campaign, sensitive moment, the lobby tried to push through Congress a resolution calling for a blockade of Iran. Okay, blockade's an act of war, could lead to unpredictable directions. And they got a lot of people to sign on. A lot of people in Congress signed on. That all of a sudden it stopped. Well, you don't know exactly why, but it's almost certain that it stopped because they got a signal from the White House saying we don't want Israel to get us into a war with Iran. So it stopped, and that was the end of that. And there are plenty of other cases. Actually, some of the cases are pretty narrow, but quite interesting. Like Israel's plans for the occupied territories. One of the core elements of the plan is to develop a corridor that bisects the West Bank, breaks it in two parts. The corridor will expand from what's called Jerusalem, which is some huge area way beyond, bigger than Jerusalem, all settled in violation of Security Council orders. So a corridor that goes from there to the east, going through a town called Ma'ale Adumim. The town was established by Yitzhak Rabin in the 70s and then developed mostly in the 90s to the Oslo agreements with the purpose of bisecting the West Bank.
All right,
But
so
in
that
order
gets
to
a bright
complete
light
it, they
green.
have to construct in a corridor.
Uh-oh.
It's called the
Did I
E1
miss one right there?
corridor. It goes from Greater Jerusalem.
No, I did it
to
around
Ma'ale
the
Adumim.
triangle.
They have
Okay,
to build
cool.
there. And they very much want to do it because they want to finish this construction. The U.S. said you can't do it.
Just kind of going over each one here real quick, make sure I didn't fuck it up
The
and miss
relations
one.
of power are such they simply have to do what they're told. And the lobby doesn't get involved when it's going to
With
run
the
into,
green
you
value,
which is
our
what you
tone balances pretty nicely with the light blue
say.
as
So there
well.
are lobbies, but there are limits, and the big lobbies are far and away the business lobbies.
Whoa, careful.
And they're the ones who really run the country.
Shit. Hold on. Let me adjust my tripod here. There we go. Alright. And for anyone listening there in the background, that is Noam Chomsky about in the middle of the communicative structure
Orwellian question
lecture
that you spent a good
on
amount of
my
time
Noam
discussing.
Chomsky playlist.
In relation to
Really interesting talk.
the question of the acceptance of Israel in the OECD this week, and perhaps on the
Alright,
basis
but that's
of,
about it for the moment.
like-mindedness
So thank you for watching. That's Adam Sturch broadcasting from the Mushroom Mansion, Taos, New Mexico. Working on oil,
that in
painting,
relation to the
electric eel.
Operation Cast Lead of
Have a good night.
last year, and now what happened.